On the 14th of September 1975, a small group of people set off from the far north town of Te Hāpua on an 1,100-kilometre trek to Wellington. They were protesting about the loss of Māori land, and they were led by Whina Cooper, first president of the Māori Women's Welfare League, and now, at the age of 79, rallying support with the call of not one more acre.
This land is ours. We are awake. Te ihi, te mana, te tapu, marangara.
That land march was huge because it went on for about a month, and it was in the news all the time. And you can't tell me that it wouldn't have made anyone think twice about the issue.
For the thousands of New Zealanders who took part in the land march and the hundreds of thousands who cheered them on, the issue of Māori land could no longer be ignored.
It highlighted the fact that we had almost lost all our land over such a short period of time.
It didn't matter whether you were Māori, whether you were Pākehā, people believed in what we were saying. Not one more acre of Māori land to be taken.
Maori was too polite to tell the truth, because the real issue was not one more acre to be stolen.
For Pākehā New Zealanders, the march was an awakening to the injustices that had led to Māori losing more than 95% of their land.
This is the basis of our pleas. Give our land back.
For Māori, it was a show of unity that would give them the strength to fight for the return of their land in the years ahead. The 1975 Land March was organised by Te Rōpū o Te Matakite, a Māori land rights group that included both radicals and conservatives, making it essential that it was led by someone with the mana of Whina Cooper.
Whina at the time was the only person capable of doing what she did. She was the only kaumātua, kuia kaumātua, that had the balls to do it. And she provided the necessary glue to keep the people together.
The Matakite organisation hoped to provide a united Māori voice in the fight to retain ancestral land.
Māori seem to be powerless in preventing the continual taking of their land, and you've got some conservative Māori groups who want to work with Parliament, and you've got some very radical Māori groups emerging as well, who want to try some different methods.
One of the more radical groups was Ngā Tamatoa, who'd been at the forefront of Māori protest during the early 1970s.
Ngā Tamatoa had a very clear analysis of what had happened to our people, and among those many wrongs was the fact that nearly all of our land had been taken from us, and you can't, in a very basic tikanga sense, be tangata whenua if you don't have whenua to be tangata upon.
You had the Town and Country Planning Act, you had the Rating Act that had, was, and several other enactments that were designed to actually take Māori land. And Mum felt that you'll be a koretake in your own whenua. Then that's why she felt, enough is enough, not one more acre.
My brother Joseph then was staying in Panmure, Auckland, and she gathered Johuk and Witi Macmath and a few others to Joseph's house, and she started talking then about how she's been worrying about Māori losing land.
And the fact that she wanted to start a whole new movement in her late 70s seemed quite a remarkable thing for me. And she wanted me to write up what her intentions were, and I published one of the very first articles on the Matakite movement. She called a meeting at Māngere Marae and invited a whole bunch of people there to really make representations on the state of Māori land issues in their area.
We talked, what shall we do next? And Vivian come up with the, or we should march, maybe.
We would go from the top of the country down to Wellington and take a month about it, and by the time we got there, if we did it the right way, all eyes of New Zealanders would be on this issue.
She come back home to Pangaru to talk to her people, the old people that were still alive here. We are going on this march, and I need you to be beside me. And her people just said, tautoko kuia, tautoko. We are behind you with the Land March 1975.
Tonight, I hope that we can get over quite a lot.
We got involved because my wife and I, we have had a history of our people's struggle with the land and the difficulties the older people had over the years of going all the way from up north to the land court in Whangarei, sitting there all week, then being told 4:30 on a Friday night, you got to come back again next week. But there would be a little jibe on the side, maybe it's better to sell it than all that problem's gone.
It just all sounded wrong. And I think basically that's why I got involved.
You know, we haven't been invited to Turua. But they've said they're
Excuse me, are you speaking to yourselves or are you speaking to the chair, please?
She just pointed to me and she said, that lady there is going to be my secretary. And I was really bewildered, you know, because none of them knew me. And then Whina said, well, I can see her grandfather standing behind her. And he had long been dead. And that's how I got involved. Autocratic rule, real tino rangatira style.
Virtually every weekend we were somewhere else in the country, going on to Marae, Whina talking about the issues, the reason why Matakite needed to do something, the reason why the land march was going to take place, and asking directly for people's support.
I say it may be very important. They want to know whether they will all march with us.
I was tasked with going through Waikato. That was pretty hard. It was by this time, I got the nerve to stand up on a marae, which, you know, in those days, women didn't stand up.
It was the same corridor all the way down the road. They wanted to know how many people would we be bringing with us. We said we didn't know. We didn't know any dates. We couldn't confirm a date. But from Te Hāpua, we systematically approached every other marae right down to Ngāti Toa.
As well as organising the route of the march, two taonga had to be created. Joseph was given the job of writing a memorial of rights to be presented to Parliament.
You sit at your desk and do it, son. So I had to do it.
The task of carving a pauwhenua to lead the march was given to Mokapuru.
Well, they had pauwhenuas for claiming lands or things like that. So they asked me if I could do one for the march. I said, oh, well, we'll try it. We'll have a go. The old lady, old Whina, brought me up here. So her nephew brought me to this forest. This is where we got the tree from.
As we come up here, these things here are tears where our people have always been crying for their land.
Wherever Whina and the whānau and the group went, I went. And for all that time, I never said one word, you know, and they said, well, you know, gee, we're looking for someone to carry the pauwhenua. And then, then my name got said, you know, oh, there's a young fella here who's been here all this time, and, you know, I think he should be the one to carry it. And that's really how it happened, yeah.
Everyone would like to know what's a pauwhenua, what it means. It meant that this land is ours. We stick the pauwhenua in the ground and we say, this land is ours. We are awake.
On the first day at Te Hāpua, Matakiti were blessed with a good omen. Golden weather had been predicted, and so it was. Te rupu o te Matakiti, those with foresight, see the unity of the Maori people as the greatest tool they have in fighting for retention of their land.
First thing in the morning, they did the whakamui, the karakia, the blessing and that, and then we started from the Te Hāpua marae. It was one of the proudest times of my life. Number one, to have the privilege of carrying the powhenua and knowing that it was not only about us there, but about the many generations of people who were before us in that. I mean, you know, as well, like your tupuna were with you, you know. And it was so really choice to have all the old people and the awhi, the support they gave to me as that young person. I mean, you had to be proud.
A smaller group of marchers started off from Te Wairinga, meeting up with Whina Cooper in the main body of the march at the intersection with the road from Te Hāpua.
Whina just came into her own, you know, that iconic image, which I think has become one of the great photos of New Zealand from that first day where she walked ahead of the march with her granddaughter, just became there's a certain canniness in her that knew that this was going to be the image that was going to hit the heart of New Zealanders. And it certainly did.
All I remember was these long-legged young guys leading the march, you know, with their long strides, and us little, you know, with our short legs, having to sort of trot to keep up with them. I mean, slow down at the front, slow down, you know.
We were only young, you know, 19, 18. When we first started, there was a lot of talking, a lot of excitement, a lot of people having things to say. But as it started to go along a little bit further, for me it was thinking a lot about why we were doing it.
We've given up work. Many of the people on the march, some have thrown their jobs in, others have been sacked just to participate.
I must have looked a bit of an alternative character turning up, and I was an alternative character, and I turned up with my little dog Puku as well. And I wasn't greeted with great warmth, but on the other hand, I wasn't rejected either. And in that walk from Te Hāpua to Te Kao, Hone Tūwhare befriended me. I went naively carrying my conch shell, which I had learnt to play. And so as we were approaching Te Kao, Hone said, "Hey, Chris, blow the conch, blow the conch." So I blew the conch. Yeah, marshals turned around, "Who the hell's blowing that conch? Put that bloody thing down." But I was roundly told off, and I buried my head, and I just was so embarrassed. And that really educated me about how my behaviour had to be.
They had marshals and it was Betty and Dave, and they had Witchy McMath, who was an ex-SAS, so they had a bit of an army sort of thing there as well. Basically, you know, you adhered to what you were told, and that was that.
So far, the committee has decided to send one bloke home, and any more nonsense, particularly on marae etiquette, it'll be home skis straight away.
There was strict tikanga and kaupapa you had adhered to, like drugs, alcohol, and all those normal things that are, you know, really important when you're carrying a kaupapa like that. And I remember a few people got kicked off because, you know, they didn't adhere to the kaupapa.
The thought of walking all the way to Wellington. A lot of people didn't think we'd be able to do it. Well, I didn't think we'd be able to do it. My grandmother was giving us all these little tips, you know, on what to do. If you get blisters, you know, mimi on your feet. That'll help dry it up, it won't get infected. Okay, you know.
Sometimes we had huge distances to cover. And just out of the blue, Witty McMath, one of the march organisers, just said, "Oh, well, we're going to break up into small little groups and all take a piece of the march. So we'll all be marching 20 miles or so each day, but the Matakita as a whole will be marching the whole of New Zealand."
I was working for the police department in Wellington at the time, and the commissioner of police then was Bob Walton. And every morning he used to come in and tell me what was going on in Auckland. I thought, well, this has to be important if the commissioner of police is watching it so carefully. I came back from Wellington
And when I walked in, this whole marae was chock-a with people trying to find a bed for the night.
Coming back to my tupuna and seeing my whānau here, our old people here as well. I mean, I think I just had a big tangi probably when I come into the whare here, yeah. But it was really important for me that they stayed here on my marae.
From Mangamuka, more and more people arrived, but employers forbid a lot of their workers from participating. And as we walked past the freezing works in Moirawa, every man dropped his knife and walked out onto the road to tautoko the marches. And there was Maori and Pākehā there. They defied their employer and did what they were going to do in our support. It was then that we realised we're onto it.
We were very apprehensive about what sort of reception we would get from Pākehās mainly, whether we would get sworn at or shot at. Yeah, well, we were very nervous. But quite the contrary. They would wave out and clap us as we walked past and give us food.
We had cooks on the road who would go ahead, stop on a byway and make lunch for everybody and say, OK, you know, the march would come past and they'd all stop and eat and have a little rest and carry on.
When you came into the main towns, you know, we'd sing songs. And one of the songs that we sang a lot of was Te Rōpū Matakite.
I always remember Dave Clark's wife, Rennie. She had a great, great gift of throwing her voice, and she would lead us with the marches song. It was lovely.
The beginning of the song is Nā te kore mohi o ka haere wehe wehe. You know, because you don't understand things, you tend to go off in different pathways.
Te rōpū matakite, e mahi nenga mahi, e painga mō te au katoa.
Most of my dearest memories, I suppose, come from the marching through the north when there was much less of us and we were just still pave making and thinking about how we're going. You certainly got the feeling that you were part of history in the making and something that which had the potential to be very successful. We had no idea how successful it was going to be.
When we got to the towns, people would physically join in and march through their towns with us. And then they'd march from the town to the whichever marae we might have been staying at that particular night. And some of them would shoot home and grab their gears, and next minute we had more people on the Māori Land march.
As the marchers approached Auckland, Whina Cooper was completing negotiations with the council to get permission to walk across the harbour bridge.
Mum was contacting the council to see whether they like it or not. We were going to march across the bridge. At first there was a refusal. You can't march across the bridge.
They said go right around the old highway, but no way, no, we felt it was very important to go over that bridge to make a statement.
We thought we'd just get on the bridge and we'd just walk, you know, across the bridge. Well, it wasn't like that at all. You got on the bridge and you started to walk, and then it started to sway, you know, and it was really, really scary.
People started to panic, you know, started to turn back to try and get off the bridge. And of course, you know, there were children and elderly there that had been stampeded over. And the marshals, you know, we had our work cut out to stop them panicking. And I actually hit someone with a stick. He was yelling out, turn back, turn back. And he was a tall guy, and luckily I went and I whacked him with a stick and I told him to shut up.
Luckily we had a man named Witty McMath who'd been in the army. He just came and stuck his hand up, came through all the way through, stopped everybody on the bridge and moved them off in small sections. And kapai Witty McMath, well done.
So we all breathed a sigh of relief when we got off the bridge. And then we assaulted Queen Street.
By then we had more and more older people So they then organised that I collect a mountain goat, one of these big ex-army four-wheel drive vehicles from Mount Ruapehu. So from then on, I was in the background driving the big truck, taking old people to the next port of call, going out and helping get cabbages or whatever that was required. It was great that I could do things, have Māori people out marching and me driving the truck.
Although the march was gathering support, some leaders of the Kingitanga were concerned that it could harm their relationship with the Labour government. And the reception at Tūranga Waiwai was muted.
Our mother was expecting the Queen to be there to welcome the marchers on to Tūranga Waiwai, but that never happened.
We wanted their support. That didn't come till afterwards.
It was nice to reach Tūranga Waiwai just the same. A lot of people were upset, especially Whina, that there wasn't a big pōwhiri. That's Māori politics, eh?
In Narawahia, yes, sure. There was differences of opinion, but there was nobody telling us to stop marching.
I was working at the time in Hamilton for a trucking company, and I had said to the manager there that I wanted time off work to join the land march, and I was refused my annual leave, which I was due. And by the time it got there, I had just come to the conclusion that I was going to go regardless, and subsequently got fired when I got back.
The word that we used to pull everybody together was not one more acre Māori land will be sold. You don't want to get too wordy or else you get all mixed up. So if that's the kupu, ko tahi roa te kupu, not one more acre of Māori land to be sold.
I really believed that if there were enough of us and that we were strong enough, that would be the case.
But yet they were getting sold. Even while we were on the road, was happening.
At Kihikihi, Whina Cooper paid homage to the great Māori leader, Riwi Maniapoto, who spent most of his life fighting for the retention of Māori land.
When I saw her coming up to the monument, it was like two rangatira were acknowledging each other. And even though he was 8 feet down, he was still acknowledging her and probably encouraging her to carry on.
At every marae, the kuia and kaumatua would gather together to sign the Memorial of Rights.
Nobody knew what was in the Memorial of Rights, and it had to be read out to everybody to make them understand what it was all about before they signed it. And I was given the task to actually do that.
I te noho a te iwi Māori o Aotearoa, o ke topa 1975. Memorial of Right, ngā kupu Pākehā, ne?
I was told by my mum to go and get my grandmother, Rangi Māori e Hitit. She said, go on, you've got your licence now, go and get your grandmother and bring her up. She needs to be here to sign. I went down to get my grandmother, and she said to me, oh, Whina walked straight past my house. She's younger than me. You go and get her and bring her here. I said to my grandmother, who was 83 at the time, I don't think that's going to work. I'm certainly not a 15-year-old going to go up there and says, oh, my grandmother wants you to go down there. And she says, oh, give me a few minutes and I'll get ready. I think everyone was in awe that this Memorial of Rights is about to be signed by our kaumatua and kuia.
There was a contingent from Rotorua that had marched across, so our numbers, I wouldn't say they doubled, but they sort of had risen considerably.
And that was only a day or two before we got to that little marae in the middle of the paraparas called Otoko. Even though the marae didn't physically have the capacity to cope with the amount of people that were on the Hikoi, they welcomed us. Whatever was available that they had available, they made available to us. So, yes, I just want to be here to all those people.
When the marchers came, you could hear them carting out down at the bottom road, riding right up here. At that time, we had no electricity here at Otoko. So we had our meals on open fire.
I remember those, them carting the tables to try and get everyone fed in there. But I mean, that manaki, that thing of feeding the people was so important.
I was shamed because we didn't have nothing. We looked at all the other marae, they're beautiful. What we had was just ourselves, yeah.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful there. It was on a hill. Well, the people have left, like all Maori villages, people leave. But the aroha and the spirituality, while we were there, the place came alive. The place came alive.
It just seemed to be like a stone that was gathering momentum and support as it went. But certainly by the time it hit here, we were ready to support it 100%. And that's why you had the real tight-lipped nannies, the growly nannies. Before the march even got into Arohe, they were going around doing the checklist on making sure that everything was in place. Why? Because it was our mana at stake.
When you go into different areas, you hear the whenua of other tupuna, and those are all really important things about being part of, a big kaupapa like that.
Particularly for the elders at Kaiwi, it was all about the Taranaki raupatu, the confiscation of Taranaki lands. So it was also about revisiting those grievances to ensure that the voice of the Taranaki of Whanganui would accompany the march.
As the march moved down the country, 60,000 signatures were collected for the Land March petition to Parliament, and discussions of the issues ranged far and wide.
Outside and inside the marae, there was full debate. We had the komos on one side, we had the churches on the other side. We had one guy was a moon worshipper, and he had his say. And of course, to make it worse, we had the priest there from Tuhoi. And that bugger would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he'd start his karakia, and he wouldn't stop until it was daylight. Well, we had about 2 hours sleep. This was going on every night.
Actually, the biggest problems was how well we were fed. I think I actually put on weight during the land march, even though we were marching, 20 miles every day. We were just so generously welcomed every time we stopped at a marae.
Into every marae we've been to, people became our families the minute they called us onto that marae. And then they awhi'd us in whatever way they could. Oh, look at them here, getting their feet rubbed. Oh, gosh. That's how it was. Nobody wanted to limp. Nobody wanted to show anybody that they were in pain.
While the marchers were making their way to Ōtaki, the Treaty of Waitangi Act was being passed into law. Future breaches of the treaty could now be challenged, but nothing from the past, and Whina saw no reason to change her usual speech.
You don't know Natali. Haina tia ton toino kuni, you got $40 here. Kapai kwa haina. Kahore me ana ire ho na koe. Amulia to go to my land. Come on, I know you signed there before. Ko te taina, I runga i ngā mea pipi, a harani te ngō ngā mea hoi no kia koe pipi hea we ni mea. Ka hore kua hoko ke.
From Raukawa Marae, the marchers had a 50-kilometre walk ahead of them to Porirua, where they would have 2 nights to recover before the final march to Parliament.
It was like, wow, we've finally arrived. You know, it was like the month had passed by then. And that was huge. I remember the heaps and heaps of people were there waiting for us. And those 44-gallon drums of kina and paua, and, you know, it was just absolutely blooming amazing.
And to know that you'd help bring the mana of that hikoi all the way from Kapawairua to Te Hāpua, and you're arriving there, and this is the day before you actually went on to, you know, onto government ground, onto Parliament. It was, you know, like I'm getting shivers now just thinking about that day.
And the news is the head of the Māori Land march near Wellington. Our reporters say the column now seems to number in excess of 4,000 people. It's been joined since early this morning by young and old, and in spite of rain, which set in late in the morning, the march's spirits are still high.
We had people coming up the motorway the other way, and cars were stopping and people were jumping out with their photos of their tūpunas, and it was lovely.
When we got into Wellington, there were so many people in the march by then that we were filling up the streets from one side of the shops to the other side of the shops on both sides of the road.
We were in front of the land march, and this woman came with this korowai, and it was made up totally of pukeko feathers, the most magnificent korowai I have ever seen, and she put it over me.
You couldn't hear a thing because there was people coming up singing the one song, all marching in the same direction, and that was adrenaline all on its own.
Whina's call, the song she wrote, was all about people awakening, and that was as much for Pākehā people as for Māori people. It was an awakening for the whole country.
There were just thousands of people there, and all our rangatira from all over the motu. And there was a big crowd waiting there as well. It was a bit overwhelming, actually, when I think about it now.
Just to be there and see all those old people, you know, crying. It was a big emotional moment.
We've accomplished what we set to do, and that was to walk our mother, our land, to carry that message that not one more acre of land to be taken away, to be alienated.
Rowling was the Prime Minister at the time, and he met us, Matt Rata with him, presented him with the memorial rights. He accepted it, and I can remember saying, you know, your march will not be in vain. Goodbye, you know. Show over. Everybody dismissed. Thank you very much, Pampina, you know. You can all go home now.
The government at the time, really, that was a good march. You know, short and sweet. That was a good march. Yeah, and what?
Now that we've done it, your lady wanted to wait for the process of Parliament. And a group of them said, no, we want the answer now. And they stayed on the steps of Parliament, and your lady wanted them, no, you can't do that.
It was always the intention ever since we got here that we wouldn't move until we got a definite assurance from government in writing that not 1 acre of Māori land will be alienated by government legislation.
But I think at that time, it was sort of late in the year, and Parliament went into recess. So there was nobody there anyway, but we stayed.
I am asking you, all members of the public, to clear Parliament grounds from the front...
On Christmas Eve, newly elected Prime Minister Robert Muldoon ordered the eviction of the protesters from Parliament grounds.
When I think about the Land March, I think about Whina. I can still clearly see all those old people and the laughter and the seriousness and all those things that make us who we are. And I listen to my tupuna saying to me that, when you got this sort of moment of despair, them saying, you know what to do, you got to carry on.
The 1975 Land March was a call for people to awake to the issues around Māori land. And a major part of its success lay in the network of relationships formed on the road that would provide support for future protests.
The most profound effect of the Land March was it showed our people we need not be weary anymore. And that became obvious in the years following the Land March with the more public and overt expressions of opposition.
Court cases, challenging councils, challenging the Crown all over the country. It was just blossoming, this message of not one more acre to go. But not long after the Land March, it was Bastion Point, of course. And Matikiti went there to Tautoko. And yes, I was arrested, much to my dad's horror. But kei te pai.
The 1977 occupation of Bastion Point was the first major protest after the Land March. After years of land grabs that had left Ngāti Whātua o Ōrākei virtually landless, then Prime Minister Rob Muldoon planned to sell Bastion Point Reserve for luxury housing.
They were going to develop the whole of Bastion Point. And there was a certain pivotal point where they already had services going in. So they had to be stopped.
We had to physically stay on the land and build a shanty town in the marae on Bastion Point. And we had around about 3.5 acres of garden. The people weren't just sitting up there and doing crosswords, and everybody was in the garden.
Karakia was done every night, every morning. Breakfast, lunch, tea had to be organised. Meetings, many hui.
We want that flag to fly. We want that flag to fly. We want this house to stand because this is the basis of our pleas. Give our land back. That's all we want.
All the haraweras came and many others that were on the Land March, and Whina Cooper came up quite often.
The land on which the buildings and other property hereabouts stand is Crown land.
Live.
We had many meetings to tell the people who were protesting with us that, this is a peaceful occupation. Even if the police come, keep your hand in your pockets. We don't want, to start a riot or anything like that.
The message that people got was, good grief, is this what we want New Zealand to be? The pivotal photo of the helicopter shot of 1,000 police, army personnel surrounding Takparafo. At that point, where the government had to come down heavy-handed, we won. It would take a while, but from that point, we knew that we had won the right to get our land back.
Any property or buildings remaining on this land will be removed or demolished at my direction.
People lost their jobs because they believed so much in the take. I lost a daughter. My mother and father passed away. The ignominy of seeing them being arrested will never go. Of seeing all those kaumātua who stood fast and were all arrested will never be erased from my memory.
The occupation of Bastion Point had lasted for 506 days, and it would be over 10 years before the land was returned. But attention now turned to Raglan, where ancestral land taken for an emergency landing strip during the Second World War had been turned into a golf course instead of being returned to Tainui Āwhiro.
The only person who stayed on the land was my grandmother, and she carried on fighting the government for the land to be returned. And in 1955, when she died, my mother ended up having to take over that fight. She actually was strengthened, I think, by the fact that she went on the land march because she knew she had many friends out there, people of the same ilk that she could call on. And that's exactly what she did. When she wanted to stake the golf course out, she just put out a phone call and all these other people would come in because we're a small tribe at home.
There must have been about 200 of us on the golf course. And how can they arrest 200 of us? And some of them were elderly people.
17 people arrested. All of those people had participated in the land march.
All of those that ended up in the paddy wagon, I looked around and I thought, gee, this is all the crowd that was with the march and was with Te Matakiti that carried on afterwards. Yeah. And this can't be a coincidence.
The Raglan golf course land was eventually returned to Tainui Āwhiro in 1987.
People came from the north, south, east and west to actually walk with us. And really, Whaingaroa Raglan was one with the support of the motu.
In 1985, the new Labour government gave the Waitangi Tribunal the power to investigate historical breaches of the treaty. But the power to make decisions about compensation is still in the hands of the government of the day.
Less than 2% of the total value of what has been taken from our people has been returned, and there have always been fiscal limitations on the amount of settlements, and less than 5% of its recommendations have been adopted in full by the Crown. But I always believe that there is value in people being able to tell their stories.
The Waitangi Tribunal has given us an opportunity to have our history recorded. Simple, that's it. Government doesn't have to take notes, and they don't take notes of the Waitangi Tribunal. They continue to do what they want to do.
In spite of the recommendations of the Waitangi Tribunal, the government still passed legislation taking away the right of Māori to claim ownership of the seabed and foreshore, leading to the largest Hikoi since the 1975 land march.
It was sort of unbelievable that in 2004 that the government, while in the middle of settling treaty grievances, should create new grievances.
It was fundamentally an issue about one of the last tiny pieces of our land being confiscated.
The problem with what happened with foreshore and seabed was that what was taken away was the right of Māori to go to court. So the right of Māori to go to court and test this case about ownership of the takutai moana. But actually, to have the right for your day in court taken away from you, that's pretty exceptional in a Western democratic society, isn't it?
I believe that we're one of the very few Indigenous people that has a deal going with its government, and they do consult, but the final bit is giving back the land that they stole. They've stolen it. Give it back at zero cost. That's the bottom line. And I know that future generations will not stop marching until the bottom line is achieved.
40 years after the land march, Māori land still makes up less than 6% of the total land in New Zealand. And while Treaty of Waitangi settlements have provided some redress, the amount paid out is a tiny percentage of the value of the land that was taken. Many claims are still to be resolved.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.